Okay, I think that's most of us joined. Thank you very much for joining our first ever webinar. We're going to have a few people trickling in after this, so I'll just keep admitting people as they join. You might hear the dinging in the background. But thank you very much for joining our first ever webinar. It's very exciting for us to see such a fantastic uptake and see a lot of faces joining the meeting. So it is our first ever webinar, so if anything does go wrong, please do bear with us, but I think everything should go smoothly. So, but yeah, thank you for joining. So I'm Fraser, I'm the Associate Director here at HebHomes, and I'm joined by Alasdair Stephen, who is our Founder and Managing Director. So today we're really just giving you a really brief overview of the full process of building your own home, of course with HebHomes insight into that. So hopefully you'll come away today with a bit more information about how we take you through that process and what you can expect from that journey. And it should be a very exciting and fun journey, so hopefully we can convey that a little bit today. So today we're going to go through things like, I did add to the meeting notes a brief summary of what we'll discuss today, but we'll be considering things like what to look for in a plot, planning considerations, building control, the design process and the build process, really just to give you a whistle-stop tour of what to expect from that self-build journey. Next year we'll be doing monthly webinars, so we'll choose a date in future, a recurring date once a month, so that we can get more into detail, get our teeth into some subjects like financing and looking at plots and looking at the process in greater detail. When you're on the call, if you could just keep your mics off for now. I think they might be automatically turned off, but feel free to keep your video on. And if you've got any questions as well throughout our presentation, just add it to there's a Q&A section that you can add your questions to. So Ali's just going to start us off with a bit of an introduction to HebHomes, about what we do and where we came from. So Ali, feel free to take it away.
Hello everyone, I'm Alasdair Stephen, I'm an architect, and I suppose going back to how HebHomes started, myself and my twin brother Neil, we were living on the Isle of Skye with our grandmother. I was learning Gaelic from her, but I was still keeping my hand in with architecture. And from that we started designing a few houses for ourselves and for some friends locally, and the business grew. And that was the beginning of our architecture practice, Dulachas Architects, and you're more than welcome to go and look at their website. They do some pretty amazing stuff. But we found back in the early 2000s that people were coming to us and saying, I want that design you've done, but I want it in the south of England, I don't want any other changes, or I want it in the Western Isles. And it wasn't a very efficient way to run a business and architecture practice, traveling all over the country, and also wasn't particularly inspiring for us as architects, just designing the same thing. So, funnily enough, someone from a separate business told us their business plan at a Cayley at the Talisker Whiskey, believe it or not. And the next day we decided to set up our own company. So what we did then was we effectively kitified our designs. We developed our ranges. This was through Dulachas, and eventually we set up a kit house company called HebHomes, which we launched in 2004. So these houses are all most of them are based on the original designs by Dulachas. These were informed by the longhouse, the black house design of the Highlands. So they're abstract designs of the longhouse, which is quite common across Northern Europe. Now, the reason we started designing in this style was we were seeing, I mean, Ireland is, a perfect example of this, where you've got poor quality, below tolerable standard housing, and suddenly kits become available and people will buy these kits to put them up. And the transformation in living conditions was quite profound. And a similar thing was happening in the Highlands of Scotland, but there was no real connection between the architecture of the past and those kit houses, which were really designed for suburban America. So we thought to ourselves, how can we design buildings which use modern technology and affordable technology, which was timber frame, but how can we relate it to the landscape? And the longhouse form was the perfect form for, as I say, most of Northern Europe, and particularly the west coast of Scotland, because you can slot these buildings into the landscape. So that's how we started. We've now grown the business. We've got people working in the Isle of Skye, but our main office is here in Glasgow, and we don't just operate in the Highlands of Scotland. We operate across the UK and Ireland mainly. So we're doing more and more houses in England, and yeah, they're proving very popular.
Yeah, I think as you touched on, Ali, the purpose and our purpose behind HebHomes is to provide these beautiful spaces at a reasonably affordable price. So it's a good alternative to bespoke architecture where you're working with an architect on the design like you would with Docus. But we found that people were asking for the same kind of designs, and we want to supply a product that is very sustainable, very solid, is very durable, and we want to make it affordable to build on these incredible plots across the UK and Ireland. So moving on to plots, just getting started on the kind of considerations when you are starting your journey of a self build. It always comes down to plots. So it's figuring out where you want to live, and I'm sure most of you will have a good idea of where you want to be, and quite often that is away from where you currently live. It could be the dream of moving up to the west coast of Scotland, or it could be building in your garden, and a lot of that does vary the conditions that you need to consider. So things like you do need to consider your local community very carefully. So that's things like making sure you understand the context that you're building in is really important. And that's particularly important when you're building quite far away from your own home. You don't know your neighbours, you don't know the community that you're getting into. You might have visited wherever you're planning on building, but you don't really know the finite detail of how it is to build in that community. And we built all across the UK, and the particularly challenging sites are usually like a west coast island where you've got a very tight-knit community. And you want to be very careful with that and make sure that you're getting into that community sensitively, and making sure that you're showing that you're going to be active in the community and not just coming in to plonk a house and live there. Just simple things like, if you say, for example, you're building on the Isle of Lewis, you can't build on a Sunday, for example, because of the church. There's things like that you need to consider. So just get into the finite detail of what is it actually going to be like building a house here and then living here. But as I say, some of you will be building a house down the road. Sorry, Alan.
Yeah, I think that is very important. I mean, one of the things you have to consider is your own lifestyle and what age you are. Do you need to be near a medical facility, for example? Do you need to be within walking distance of a shop? Do you want to have a local pub? I mean, I built a house in Skye when I was quite young, and there's now no taxis in Skye, so it's very difficult for me to get to the pub. So if I was to choose a site again, that's a change I would have made. But yeah, these simple considerations are quite important. But then you also have to think about the location of the plot. We'll go on to finance in the next slide, I think, but the location of a plot has a huge impact on the cost of the house, a massive impact. If you're building on a remote island or up the very northwest of Scotland, north of Ullapool, there just aren't the local contractors there. So it's very, very expensive. Likewise, if you're building in and around London, the contractors, the subcontractors, they charge more. You just have to accept that. But also the individual plot itself, the topography of that plot, how long is the access road? Do you have electricity nearby? These things, if you don't understand them at the beginning before you make the purchase, it could destroy your budget. So it's just one of these things you have to look out for.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Unfortunately, the sloping sites are usually the ones that have the best views, but also they're more expensive to build on. But it doesn't mean there's usually a solution for anything. For example, this house that we're showing on the slide here, that's a white house based on the west coast of Skye. And it's a very sloping topography. And when you're doing that, you need to look at things like how do you actually locate the house on the site? Are you doing a cut and fill? Are you leveling it? So or are you even doing a retaining wall? So all of that kind of adds value, but it does usually open you up to amazing views. But if you are building on a nice flat site, it's much more straightforward to bring in services, do the foundations, and actually build on that plot. And there's other things that you do want to consider. Obviously, where are the views? Our houses are adaptable, so you can pick up views wherever they are. Sites are always different. Where's the south light as well? You do want to get as much of the elevation facing south as you can, if it's possible, because it just means that you're getting lots of lovely lighting throughout the day, and also getting those views out to the house. It just means your heating bill should be lower because you're getting lots of natural free heat from the sun. And also things like, if you are looking for a plot, usually they will have some kind of planning permission on it, planning permission in principle or full planning even. So that's really helpful because it does show that the planners are open to development off that site, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they've done all the site surveys and make sure that it's very buildable. So we'll go into a bit more detail on that in the next site. But generally, when you are looking at sites and plots, it's good to bear that in mind. Even if it does have planning, it doesn't mean it's buildable, or it doesn't mean it's cheap to build. So quite often we recommend that you offer you put in a conditional offer on the plot, subject to planning permission and the site surveys being completed. So it means that you get to do a lot of investigation on the site before you actually purchase it. So things like doing your topographic survey, doing your ground conditions report, doing your drainage design as well, because quite often you'll be connecting to a septic tank. So there's quite a lot of things there to consider before you actually complete on the purchase.
Yeah, I think we once had a client who came to us who'd already bought a site. It was a beautiful site, and it cost them around about £200,000, and it had planning permission in principle. But when we went and had a look at the site, the road access that was shown in the two-dimensional planning drawings that were used for planning permission in principle, the road was going over a cliff edge, and there was no easy way of getting any access in. And apart from that, there was no sewage solution on the site either. So they bought this site, which for two separate reasons might not be able to be developed. We got an engineer to design an access road in, which was going to cost £100,000, but then there was no visibility space, and they needed to buy land from a neighbour that happened to be the Church of Scotland. And for over a year, they were refusing to sell the land, or allowing their land to be cut back so they could get visibility views. We eventually managed to get it all sorted out, but they were very, very close to having bought a pig in the poke for £200,000. So that's why we always say to people, putting a conditional offer on a bit of land, do not believe what the seller is telling you. We had this other job on Skye where we recommended the client to do new percolation tests, but he argued, well, the seller, the crofters, already done percolation tests, but they were worthless. They just made up the figures. So he wouldn't listen to us. He put in the system, and then lo and behold, after about a year, the toilet was backing up, and that was because there was no percolation. It was clay ground. And after that, we had to find a solution, and we eventually managed to put in an expensive secondary treatment plant and get the effluents going into the roadside ditch, which wasn't really allowed, but we managed to pull a few strings with SEPA. But both those examples are lessons as to why you should be careful. You should not purchase the land until you really know what you're getting into, because there's always a chance that it cannot be developed, or there's a chance that it's very, very expensive to develop. So that's why conditional offers, and then you can start the process. So, for example, in Scotland, we do the planning and warrant service. We would always recommend getting topographical survey, ground investigation, percolation tests done. And you will need that information at some point. But if you have that information before you exchange, if there's anything untowards, anything which is more expensive than you're expecting, you've got the option of taking it on the chin, renegotiating with the seller, or pulling out. But it's money you're going to have to spend at some point, so it's better to be forewarned with that information. And yeah, but it doesn't stop you moving ahead. You don't have to actually own the land to start the process of getting these surveys done and even getting the planning application in. And another problem that we come across is, you may have noticed in England in particular, there's been, every time there's heavy rain, it's on the news that there's sewage going into the rivers and the sea. Now, one of the reasons is for that is because surface water is connected into the main sewerage, and that's very convenient. If you're building in a suburban or urban plot, you would just connect the surface water, the rainwater, into the main sewerage, and it's an easy place for it to go. But you won't be allowed to do that anymore, especially after all the news stories we've been seeing. So if you cannot get a soakaway within an urban plot, you can't develop. So even if you access the main sewerage, it doesn't mean to say that you can actually develop that plot. We've had a couple of clients who have, where that's happened. They weren't able to develop the plot despite having full planning, and just getting to that stage where you're looking at drainage solutions. So these are the sort of things you should look out for when you're when you're buying a plot. Electricity is a huge one. People buy plots and then they discover that it's 25,000, 30,000 pounds to connect the electricity. And it's expensive. You can go off grid, but that can be expensive as well. So you really need to know this sort of stuff before you purchase. Water supply, mains water is sometimes not available. So the village or the community may have reached capacity and you won't get permission to get mains water, or there may be no mains water at all within that area. There are alternatives. You can in Scotland in particular, there's always water available, but it's normally accessible through a borehole. That can be extremely expensive. I mean, allow yourself maybe another £20,000, maybe more than that, to get that water connection. You don't have to pay water rates and you'll be showering in mineral water, but you need to know these things before you buy the plots.
Thanks, Sally. Yes, I've just got a few people saying that they can't see the presentation. Are you guys able to see the image with the notes on it? You can. Okay, great. And can you see me? Some people weren't able to see me.
No.
No. Okay. Let me just turn my camera off and on again. Ali, can you not see me?
I can. Well, I could see you a minute ago. I can see you now.
Right. Great. Excellent.
There's nothing much to look at, so don't worry.
It's supposed to be a lovely presentation. Something to look at when we're babbling on. So yeah, I mean, there is a lot to consider when you're buying a plot. When you actually get into the process, you obviously need to make sure you got everything in place before you build. So there are a lot of things to consider, and generally it will come up through the planning and building control phases. So as mentioned, you might have a site, you might get a site that already has planning permission approved on it, but generally you'll need to go through the full planning permission process again because it is very design specific. So planning basically need to know what's been built on site, and planning is they're more concerned about the external appearance of the house, so how it sits on the site, how it sits within its local context and community, and how it complies with local development policy. So some sites are simply unbuildable. They need to stay as agricultural land because it's out with the policy for the local town. But other sites, they'll be within that policy. If you do have, if it's a site that's got very tricky planning conditions attached, or there's policy that makes it unclear whether it's buildable, and you don't have planning permission or planning in principle, it's really worthwhile getting a planning consultant on board, a local one, because they're very up to speed with the local policy. We've got some great affiliate planners that we can refer you to if you did need that help. So you can always reach out if you need that assistance. But as I say, planning, they're just concerned about the external appearance. They're not concerned about the internal layout. They just want to see what the external materials are, what the windows are like, and what the kind of overall design is, including your access down into the house. Another thing to consider is the access into the site. We didn't really discuss that previously, but you've got access, you need to form an access point from a road somewhere. So whether it's a fast 60-mile-an-hour road or like a little track down a country lane, those connections are quite different. So if you've got a fast moving road that you're connecting from, you need to get really clear visibility quite far up and down the road. So you need to make sure you can achieve that. And sometimes you do need to have some kind of maintenance schedule to make sure bushes don't get overgrown, and you can still achieve visibility. And that's all considered as part of the topographic survey. So they would go out and make sure that you've got that visibility. If you're going off a track, or maybe it's even a private track, and the access is already formed from the main road, then that's great. It saves you that hassle. You do have some sites we get are very large, and they want to site the house quite far away from the access point, and that's just another cost, and it can be quite significant. If you're building a long track down to the house from the main roads, that's something you'd need to consider. But it could open you up to the best site with the best views. But it will come at a cost if your access track is excessive. Just something to bear in mind.
Yeah, I would say just to add to that, Fraser, we have quite a few people who approach us and they're wanting to build in their garden, or they've seen a bit of land that seems, too good to be true, and it normally is. It's land that doesn't have planning permission. Now, the main thing to do there is, as Fraser's mentioned, is you have to speak to a a planning consultant. But the ideal situation, the ideal bit of land you want is one which has already got planning permission in principle, or outline planning, as they call it in England, or it's got full planning. Now, sometimes people ask me, well, it's got full planning for a different design. Does that mean that I can't build a HebHomes? It doesn't matter. If it's got full planning, that's actually better than planning permission in principle, because that means there'll be more information about the site available. And what you just have to do is you have to put in effectively a new planning application or an amendment to planning, but it's effectively a new planning application for the new design. So don't let that put you off. But having a site which has either got PPP, outline planning, or full planning permission is far preferable. You could waste years of your life trying to get planning permission on a site. The thing about planning is that it always follows the local plan. If you're wanting to build it in a crofting area in the north of Scotland, that's got a random settlement pattern. And that means you can actually build in places where you couldn't build in any other part of Scotland out with crofting townships. So every other part of Scotland is more similar to England, where you've got to build within existing settlements. So it'll be infill sites, it'll be within towns and villages. It's very, sometimes people think they can go and knock on a farmer's door and say, can I build in your field? You've got a beautiful view. If you could do that, then the farmers would be multimillionaires, just like they are in Ireland, because in Ireland, you used to be able to just do that. You could just, plonk your house anywhere, and the farmers became extremely rich. But the reason that England's is a green and pleasant land, and it's still, very beautiful, is because it's got strict planning regulations, and you have to understand them. So that's why it's difficult to get planning in most rural areas. It's very difficult out with gap sites, existing infill sites, converting old buildings. So all I'm saying is go for a site which has already got planning. It's going to be much easier. If it doesn't have planning, you've got a bit of land yourself, speak to a planning consultant first. Don't spend money on an architect. Don't start getting surveys done. You need to know, in principle, can you actually build there? So you can go to the council and get pre-planning consultation, but you will not be a priority. People can wait months to get information back from a pre-planning consultation, and all they're doing is quoting policy back to you. So my advice would be, Studio Charette, for example, they'll do it for £200. They'll do a desktop study, desktop feasibility as to whether you're likely to get planning. Or as Fraser says, finds a very local planning consultant. They tend to be former planners themselves, and they'll know policy inside out. And they will give you a heads up very quickly as to whether it's worth pursuing or not. Now, the thing about using HebHomes, what you've got is an architect designed house, and you pay us £950, we release those drawings, and then you can just go for full planning with that. If you're getting a bespoke house done, and quite often if it's a controversial site, the planners will want to see a fully developed design. If you're getting a bespoke house designed by an architect and you're not sure whether you're going to get planning, it's a big financial risk for you, because you'll be spending thousands and thousands of pounds on a design and you might get a refusal. So that's one of the benefits of choosing a kit house, in particular an architect design kit house like HebHomes. You're not actually spending much money. It's just a £950 refundable. Well, it's not refundable, but it comes off the cost of the kit. But you're spending that on on the design, and then you can put in a full planning application, and that's a good thing to do if there's any risk at all that you might not get approval.
Yeah, generally our designs are very sympathetic to the context. They're very, the eaves are low, the ridge is low, so it's kind of what planners look for, and it just means that you're going to them with a very well considered design at a very low cost. You're not having to spend tens of thousands of pounds to design something, but it's usually we find that our designs are very looked very favourably upon by planners, because they are very sympathetic and low. And in terms of finishing materials as well, there's usually, we can do render, we can do timber cladding, we can do stone. So there's usually a finish that will suit your local authority. When you are going through the planning process, say you do want to proceed, you don't need to own the site, as Ali mentioned before. You don't need to own the site to actually submit for planning. You could, as I say, it could be a conditional offer on the plot that allows you to then go away and get all the site surveys done, get the planning application submitted, and make sure that everything is fine before you actually proceed with the purchase. But you don't actually need to own the plot to go in for planning. This slide, it covers the process in Scotland, but it's largely very similar in England. We offer a planning and warrant package service for Scotland only. So if you've got a plot in Scotland and you're looking to build in Scotland, we can deal with all of this process for you, and make sure you've got everything in place before you start on site. But as I say, if you're in England, it's very similar to this process. Building controls slightly different, but not vastly different. But we would always recommend that you work with a local agent. So that could be an architect, or someone suited to submit your planning, do all the site-specific drawings, and submit everything to the council for approval. With planning permission, it's the same in England. You go through a notification period where you submit your plans to the council, and your neighbours, generally within a certain radius of the site, will be notified of the application, and they usually give them a few weeks to lodge any comments or objections. If you do get comments or objections, you generally get them. It's kind of expected, but it doesn't mean that you can't build. So it really needs to be the objection needs to be highlighting a problem with policy, essentially. So it's basically what the planners do anyway. So if they are just complaining for the sake of complaining, then the planners will see through that. If you do get a certain amount of objections, then they will usually need to go to a committee. But generally, if you do have planning on the site anyway, it's gone through that process, and our designs are very sympathetic. You're not building a big 3-4 story tower. It's very sympathetic. So hopefully your neighbours would see it very favourably. Usually that it varies per council. Some councils are really overrun just now with applications, and they're working through a bit of a backlog. But generally, we would expect around 3 months from the validation of the application to an approval. Sometimes it's quicker, sometimes it's slower. It really depends on that workload. But we're seeing it now. It's a little bit better because we had such a lot of work to get through in the kind of COVID boom that now things have kind of settled down a little bit for the planners. Your planning application fee in Scotland is £600. It lasts for 3 years, and they want you to try and start within that timescale. So as soon as you start say for example, your access track and your foundations, you would then notify planning that you started on site, and then that planning then is made extant. So it's valid for the duration of the build.
Well, Fraser, yeah, I mean, a couple of things I would mention. Well, I noticed a couple of questions came in there. The vast majority of our houses are in rural areas. That we've only had 1 or 2 in suburban or urban areas. And as Fraser mentioned, the planners really like our designs because they're very, very simple forms. They're not ostentatious. They're not architects trying to show off. We've seen architects try to do something similar to ourselves, and they're putting too much of their own design style into it. And the neighbours or the planners might not like that style. It's the reason HebHomes find it. They don't only do a limited number of houses a year, but you would find it difficult to get planning in most rural areas of the UK with a big HebHomes. Whereas the planners tend to like our designs because they are those sort of simple agricultural forms that slot into the landscape. They're very unobtrusive. They're using materials that you would find in the rural landscape of the UK. Another thing one of the reasons we don't do planning applications in England is because we found that it seemed to be the national pastime of a lot of rural dwellers to put in objections to their neighbours when they want to build a house for some reason, and it just became too complicated, too many people involved. And yeah, so that's why you need a local agent on the ground to do it for you, just to be there to help you. And they know the people on the county council, they know the neighbours who might be complaining, and they can deal with it all. But so it does tend to take longer to get planning in England. You can have situations where it can take like months and months and months. I know someone said they've been waiting for 12 months. That is not unusual in some parts of the country. And that isn't just because they're too busy. It's just because there's, maybe an organised local campaign to try and get your planning application turned down. I was speaking to one woman in England who was a cancer survivor, and she got a top architect to design a house in her back garden, and neighbours had built houses in their back gardens, and she went around every neighbour, told them what was happening, what she wanted to do. They all seemed fine with it, and then when she put the application in, every single person had complained, and they had an organised campaign behind her back to try and, so it was turned down because of that, and she thought she'd get a HebHomes house built instead. And I said, well, I'm sorry, but if that architect's not going to get your approval, I don't think we will. One thing that we notice with some clients is they get quite frustrated during this period of waiting. I mean, there's really nothing much you can do where you're waiting on the planners to deal with your application. But one thing you can do, which we recommend, is actually to engage a QS, a quantity surveyor, because once you've got that planning information together, especially if you've done your ground investigation, you've designed your sewerage, you've designed your roads, you know what's under the ground, so therefore you have an idea of what sort of foundations you might need. That gives you information which will allow you to give a proper pricing of the house. So on our website, we've got an estimate of costs. If you go into the members area, which is a breakdown of all the costs associated with the houses, which has been put together by a QS, and it gives you a very, very good idea. It's using the rates of 2023, but what it can price is your particular site. So when you've got all that information, after you put in your planning application, get a quantity surveyor to basically take that information from our website, and then the information you've got from your site, and get them to price it up on the basis of the site information and location information. And what you'll find then is that they could come back with a big shock because your site's difficult, but because you've chosen a HebHomes, if you get full planning comes through and you realise, look, this is going to be out with my budget, you can lower the specification to make it cheaper, or if it's still not within your budget, you can just flip it to a cheaper house. So what you would do in that circumstance is, because you've already got planning for a HebHomes, you would choose a cheaper version. And then what you could do is you could move to the building warrant stage or building regulation approval stage, and then simultaneously amend your planning approval. You would check with the planner that everything's going to be fine, of course, before you do that, but that would mean that you wouldn't lose time. But what you don't want to do under any circumstances is, because all you've done is paid HebHomes £950 at this stage for the deposit. What you don't want to do is move on to your technical engineering building warrant stage, where you're actually beginning to pay a bit more serious money. You don't want to move on to that stage unless you've got your budget and your house aligning, because the big mistake people make is they don't align the budget and the house design that they want at the very beginning. And every architect, we know this at Dulchas, every architect has got to have that difficult conversation at the very beginning of the process, because if you don't, you're just storing up a lot of tears and anguish and stress and anxiety for later down the line. And sometimes people don't like hearing that they can't afford the house of their dreams, but you just have to be honest and be told. So that's a really, really good time to just take a rain check. That's why we're waiting on planning. They'll charge a few £100s to do it. But just make sure that site is not going to make your house too expensive for you.
Yeah, I think it's really important. We're always say as upfront as we can be about the costs. We want you to know what you're getting into and what the kind of rough expected costs are for that house. We've got this. I'm sure you've all had a look around the website at the members area, where you can access an estimate of costs, and they are based on a very straightforward site, based in mainland, with very few issues. It's probably flat, access is fine. So it's just good to bear in mind that we want to try and give you as much information before you get into that process, but it's not site specific. So as soon as you know much more information about the site, once you've got your surveys done and the design's finalised, that's when it's a great time to then go and discuss the design with a quantity surveyor. We'd love to do. There's so much you can get into with costs and things. I know we're getting a few questions about how much do things cost, but we're planning on doing another webinar next year, and probably invite one of our quantity surveyors on to have a chat about those kind of things and answer your questions. We're the designers. It's the quantity surveyors there to break down the costs and make sure that everything's been allowed for, and discuss specification and things with you. So we'll go into more detail on that next year at one of our webinars. I'll send you out all a schedule of what we're planning on doing and the topics we want to cover. But that'll certainly be one, because cost is one of the most important things to consider before you get started.
Fraser, if I can add to that, I mean, I wrote a blog a week or two ago, which is up on the website, which just explains why things are costing more. I remember back pre-2008 and the crash, there was lots of small developers all over the UK. There's probably lots of small developers still down in the south of England, because property values are so high, but in most of the UK they disappeared and they've not come back. The reason for that is because you can't actually buy land, build a house and sell it for a profit. So if you think you can, buy a bit of land, build a house and you expect it to be valued at the moment the same amount of money as it's going to cost, well, it's probably not going to happen using local agents to value it. Now, that doesn't really matter. And the reason it doesn't really matter, well, one of the reasons it does cost more is because you're building far better quality. Now, building regulations in both Scotland and England are being tightened up all the time. And the quality of the house that, I built a house cost me £35,000 in 1997. And that house would probably cost like £350,000 to build, exact same size. But the specification is so much better now because of the green agenda. So you're building very, very high quality buildings now that you just can't buy on the open market. Secondly, the tradesmen earn a lot of money now. If you go to any rural area, the local joiners and plumbers and electricians are probably the best paid guys there. Certainly are in Isle of Skye. They all the electricians race yachts against each other at galas every summer. But the guys are well paid, and there's no access to cheap European labour anymore. So that's had an impact. COVID had a big impact. Prices, there was huge inflation for about 2 or 3 years there, probably running about 25% within the construction industry. But things have calmed down. The contractors aren't as busy. They'll be more competitive. But yeah, so that's the reason it's more expensive, but you're getting much higher quality. And the other point I made in the blog is that if you look into the future, when the governments of Scotland and England are saying that you've got to reach a certain energy rating, so if you don't get up to energy rating C, and unless you've got a renewable air source heat pump or something in your house, you're not going to reach C, and you're going to have to upgrade that building. And if you don't reach that energy rating, then your house is going to massively devalue. In fact, they're threatening to make it unmortgageable in Scotland if you don't reach that energy rating. So if you buy an existing property, it'll be cheaper, but it's not such good quality. You're going to have to spend probably quite a lot of money to bring it up to standard in the future, and it's not going to be as valuable. So if you build a HebHomes, you've got a beautiful bit of architecture, you've got a building which exceeds the building regulations going into the future. It's going to be cheap to run, but it's also going to be highly desirable. So if you look into the future, what sort of house is someone going to want to buy? They're going to want to buy one of these. They're not going to want to buy an old stone building, even if it is a beautiful bit of architecture in itself. They're going to want to buy something like a HebHomes because it ticks all those boxes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's all very important because, as Ali says, the houses, they are beautiful, but they function really well. They're all powered and heated by very, the most modern systems you could use. So usually air source heat pumps, ground source heat pumps, things like that. Just to make it as future-proof as possible, keep the running costs as low as possible, and just make sure it's a home for the future, and you can spend many happy years there. I just want to finish this slide. So just going back to your planning permission, once you've got your planning approved, you then need to go through a building control process. So this is the stage that's a little bit different in England. But basically, we would do all the detailed drawings, work with engineers, and pull together a package of information that you require. And it's basically it's the detailed drawings that you build off. So it's trying to flesh out that package so that you've got all the engineering finalised, all of the site access finalised. And then we take that package. If we're dealing with your planning and warrant, then we submit that to building control. If you've got an agent acting on your behalf, they'll deal with that process. So in England, it's similar, where you get a plan check done by either the local council or a private approved inspector, and they would go through the plans and make sure they're happy with everything. But because they're standard designs, they generally are very close to, we don't get that many comments. And usually there's a bit of dialogue between ourselves and the building control officer to get things finalised.
Fraser, I would say England is different in this respect because building control has been effectively, it's been partially privatised in England. You can have this third-party consultant who can check the drawings for compliance with English building regulations. Now, the big difference is once they've checked it, signed it off, and it's submitted to the council, you can effectively start on site. Whereas in Scotland, you need to have full building warrant approval, which takes about 3 months. Now, the reason that can be, that's good and bad. The bad side of it, if you've ever read the book, Show Me the Bodies, about the Grenville disaster, is you have private companies competing who can be the cheapest. to approve building regulations, so they might not do a very good job on these things, which you saw at Grenville. But secondly, it means sometimes we get clients, we give them a technical drawing package, and then like within a week they're saying, okay, I want my kit on site, and it's like, you know, it takes 8 to 10 weeks for the windows to arrive from Norway. You know, we can't do that, so we've got to get that program lined up. You know, that's sensible. I mean, we can work around these things, but the building control can move very, very quickly in England as compared to Scotland because of that slightly different system. I mean, you can do England almost exactly the same as Scotland. You can just do it through the council if you want, and it'll take you 3 months. But yeah, you can also do it much quicker. So it's something just to be aware of.
Usually the costs are comparable as well. If you do decide to use an approved inspector, the price is probably going to be quite similar to the local council, but generally it's much, much quicker, as Ali says. So that avoids you, where I've written 3 months for approval. That's for Scotland and England. If you were using an approved inspector, usually they'll check through the plans within the month and get back to you with any comments. Quite often it's within 2 weeks, but it is largely dependent on the workload. And the fee again is based on construction value, so it's the same across Scotland and England. Generally, it will last for 3 years, and they want you to try and finish that build within that time. You can apply for extensions if you need to, because it's you know, building within 3 years is certainly possible. But if there's anything that postpones you, then you might want to apply for an extension. But generally, your build phase of a HEB home is really quite short because it's all prefabricated offsite. So you will see it taking shape very quickly. I'm just going to move to the next slide. So the design process, I just wanted to run you all through very quickly how that goes. We've covered a lot of it with the planning and building warrant slide, but just very briefly how we run that process. So on the left-hand side there, you've got the kit service. So that's HebHomes designing the house, so above your foundations. And on the right-hand side, the agent service. So that would be covered by our planning and warrant package, or your agent who would be running the project and dealing with your submissions and permissions. So first things, you want to get all your site visits and surveys done at the start. So quite often this is before you've completed on the purchase, and gather all the information that you need for that plot. So generally that's your ground conditions, topographic and drainage. So they're the kind of main ones that we need to get sorted. That's when we're able to start looking at the design of the house. So we do have a decent amount of flexibility within our designs. We've got a fantastic range. So there's usually a design that will be very close to exactly what you want and need. But there may be things that you want to tweak and change. We can do another webinar covering design changes. But there's a good degree of flexibility. But you'll be working with your project manager at HebHomes through this process to finalise your design to your brief. Once you've got that, you'll then be working through all the site-specific drawings, so things like your access to the house, parking, and then the drainage arrangements, and anything to do with the site. And before you go for planning, you want to put together a nice design statement. So that's basically just pitching the design to the planners, explaining the design ethos behind what we've designed and why we've designed it, and explanation behind the siting and materials used and things. Once you've got your planning permission, that's when you go into the detailed design stage. So we'll do we'll flesh out our drawings in much more detail, looking at wall build-ups, detailing, electrical layouts, all that kind of stuff. And that's when we get the engineers involved as well. So they'll need to design your foundations, you'll need your drainage layouts finalised, and all the kit engineering as well. So we provide the engineering as part of our kit for the house. So above the foundations. If you do have your own agent, you'll need an engineer to deal with all the site-specific engineering. So that's things like your foundations, parking area, things like that. And then once you've collated all that, that's when you go through the process of making sure you've got either your building warrant in place or you've had a plan check done by your local approved inspector. And once you've got all your approvals, once you've got your planning and your building warrant, that's when you can start considering ordering the kit and getting a contractor lined up on site. Ali, do you want to talk through the construction process?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, we don't give you an order form for the kit until you've got your full planning in place. It's just a release letter, £950 deposit, and then we release those drawings for use in the planning application. So that's whether you're using us as the agent or you've got your own agent. So it's once you've got the full planning, that's when you come back to us and say, look, I want to move ahead. And as Fraser just explained, the first thing to do is to get your approvals, and that's building warrant, your approval in England. Then what you've got to do is go onto site. Now there may be some conditions within your planning approval that you've got to make sure you comply with before you start on site. You've got to keep them informed about when you're going to start on site. But the other thing is you've got to have a contractor. Now in Scotland we offer a turnkey service with affiliated contractors. So the reason we started doing that is because what we found was that clients were going off finding their own contractors. We would go and visit the house and there'd be a lot of bodging and bad decisions and mistakes, and it just wasn't the quality that we would expect because the drawings weren't followed. So if you are doing that, if you go and find your own contractor, it's important that you've got someone who's going to administer the contract. Now the contract that's used is a minor works contract in Scotland. It's a Scottish minor works contract, and it's really, really important you have one of them. Now you can go out to tender if there's contractors available, and to see if you can get the cheapest price, the best deal. And you would want to get either an architect, your agent, or the quantity surveyor to do that for you. Or what you can do is if you know a good local contractor you want to use, you can just agree with them. Now that's been very popular. It's, as our turnkey service has been very popular for this one reason, is that over the last few years it was almost impossible for people to find contractors, good contractors, because we're so busy. So in those circumstances, it's great to find someone and effectively pre-book them in. So you can say, look, my house is going to be ready to go on site next year. Can you make yourself available? Now the risk there is you're not in a competitive tender situation, so you don't know whether you're getting the best price. You're not in the position to know whether you're getting a reasonable price or not. We've seen in the past clients who've got very, very angry because the contractors come in with a price which is higher than they were expecting. And the reason it was higher is because they had a £40,000 road to put in. It wasn't anything to do with our pricing on the website. So what you need in those circumstances is the quantity surveyor to go through their price line by line. There is always a chance the contractor will take advantage of the fact it's not a competitive situation. So you need a QS to represent you, go through their tender line by line and make sure it's fair and reasonable. At that point, once you're happy, you're contented, then you sign this contract, and that's got a start date and a completion date, and you've got a fixed price. And the only way that price will vary is if you start changing things on site, which we would highly recommend you don't do. Because if you decide to change your sockets at the ends, you're involving several trades, not just an electrician, but a joiner, the taper and filler. They might not be available, so you're delaying the building of a house. So you're liable for loss and expense, an extension of time, just for changing one socket, which could run into thousands and thousands of pounds. So it's just that doesn't really happen, but it's just a warning it could happen. So don't make changes. So during that process of the builds, the contractor will spend about a month preparing the site, preparing the foundations. We will then come onto the site with the kits. If it's a supply and erection service, we will erect the house, make it wind and watertight, get inspected, signed off, and then the main contractor will take over the work again. And they'll be putting on the roof, they'll be doing the external works, they can also be doing the internal works as well. Now that could, as you've probably seen on TV, that can all be done very, very quickly if you've got teams of tradesmen on site working on top of each other. But it actually tends to take several months. And the primary reason for that is because you're waiting for the different tradesmen to turn up. The contractors subcontract these different tradesmen and they're busy on other jobs. And so one trades can't go forward till another tradesman is finished. So the whole thing gets stretched out. And the more rural you are, the further it tends to get stretched out. So it could typically take 6 to 8 months to build a house. For larger houses, it could take 10 to 12 months. But what the process of building, which is very important that you realise, is that there's a contract between you and the main contractor. And that contractor, that contract that you have between them is administered by the contract administrator, and that would not be HebHomes. That could be the QS. You could retain the QS to be the contract administrator, which would be fine, or you could use your agent, a local architect. Now, where the QS is good is they're very good at money, but if you're not making changes, that's not that important. But where the architect the local architect or technician is good is they can go onto site and make sure the work is to the correct standard, that our drawings and specification have been followed. And if it's not, they've got the power to issue an AI, an architect's instruction, to effectively condemn that work. And the value of taking away the work that is not up to standard, replacing it with work that is acceptable, that is reduced from the next valuation. So you're basically not paying for it. What it also means under this contract is you only pay for work that's properly carried out. And the reason that is extremely important, you never let the contractor write their own contract. The reason that's extremely important is that contractor could be excellent. You've got, they're doing a very, very good job on your house, but there could be another client where they don't have a proper contract who decides not to pay that contractor, and because of that, they go out of business. And you're in a position where you no longer have a contractor in your house. If you've got a proper contract, you should be in a position where there's enough money left in that contract for another contractor to come in and finish it. Now, in reality, it's never quite enough because they're setting up costs and various things, but you will never be in the position where you've paid the contractor money up front and you're left holding the baby. There should be enough money to almost finish that house completely, so you're not at risk. The contractor's also reduced his risk, because when that contract administrator says, this is the value of work that's been done, and this is how much you've got to pay, then you will have to pay it. So it protects the contractor as well. So we had a situation where a contractor didn't have that contract set up. And what happened then was that a client decided not to pay £20,000 because some tiles were squint, and they got into a big argument. And so it's to the benefit of the contractor, it's to the benefit of you. And at the end of this, what will happen is it'll be signed off as practically complete. That means it's effectively finished, apart from de minimis snags. So that could be things that don't affect the use of the house. And then once that practical completion is given, you can move into the house and you pay 2.5% retention. There's then typically a one year defects period. So the reason it's a year, best to make it a year, is because the house going through the seasons will maybe move and shrink slightly. The SIP doesn't tend to do this that much compared to a standard timber frame. But at the end of that year, what will happen is there'll be a record of all the de minimis or any defects that become apparent over that period, and then the contractor is obliged to come back and fix them, or they will not be paid the retention. If they refuse to come back, which they occasionally do because you've got a remote site, then you've got money within the contract just to get some local guys to do it for you, and everyone's happy. So that's the way it should work. I mean, the thing about building a house, there's always stresses and strains and anxieties along the way. There's nothing is as smooth as you hope, but you're minimizing these risks with a kit house, and you're minimizing the risks by using professionals and a proper contract. If you don't, you can get yourself into a terribly stressful situation, which is what you want to avoid. Now, I think there's questions which Fraser's going to answer, and I'll help answer as well.
Yeah, we've got a few. I think, yeah, just working with the right contractors is the main thing. We've got our affiliate contractors, and I saw a question come in that do you offer it in England? And we may do. So we've got a contractor that can cover England. It depends where it is. So just we can have a conversation about that. If you do have a plot in England and you're looking for turnkey, we can have that conversation. Just wanted to run through, why you should consider working with us. Because we're obviously we've got a kind of a place in the market where we're a little bit unique, where we're not necessarily just your bog standard kit home company, and we're not the bespoke design. We sit somewhere in the middle, and of course we come from Docus Architects, and that's where it all started. So we are an architect-led practice. You do get some kit home companies that are contractor driven, so they're led by a contractor, and they're looking at just their main goal is profit, and ours is more to deliver these beautiful homes at a very high quality. So we want to make sure that the product that we're supplying is as high quality as it can be, and that's in the fabric of the building, but also the running of the building. So very insulated, very airtight, and making sure that you've got a beautiful home that will last a very, very long time. So make sure that we're not cutting any corners. It is much lower cost compared to bespoke design, because we've obviously got our standard designs that you would choose, and there's that degree of flexibility in the design, so we can make tweaks and changes to suit you and your family or whoever we're building for. You've got at the start of the process, you'll be buddied up with a project manager, and they take you through that process. So they'll lead you through the design finalising the design, and then making sure you've got everything you need for your permissions and managing that process. Generally, you will be able to find a design that suits. So we've got over 50 designs and lots of different variations of each one. So you probably will find something that's pretty much there that you're really happy with, but you can make those little tweaks. We've got two main offerings. So we've got the structurally insulated panels, so the SIPS panels. That's what we've been building with for years now. I did see a question come in about the Passive House standards for Scotland. So we've been developing this new system called the space frame system, exactly for that reason. So it's really future-proofing against these changes that come up in building regulations. So basically, Scotland, the policy is changing so that we're going to need to try and build to passive standards. It won't be Passive House, but it will be very similar standards. So even more insulated than it is now. Airtightness and MVHR is going to be essential. So this space frame system is essentially a really wide timber frame. You can use all natural materials in the build-up, but it's about a 300mm deep wall that allows you to insulate. The difference with SIPs is they're a thinner panel. So it's harder to get the U values that will be imposed upon us. So space frame is the kind of, it's the future development where we want to make sure we're covering ourselves for the Passive House standards. And price clarity and turnkey, we've already covered those options. So we've got a few questions that have come in.
Yeah, the last one there, Fraser, I'll pick up on the lifespan of a HebHomes. I mean, the thing about any house, I mean, they last a very long time if you look after them. So the reason houses tend to deteriorate is silly little things like they don't take the leaves out of the gutters, and then water gets down the back of the gutter, and it gets somehow ingresses into the building and it starts rotting. I mean, that's the sort of thing which can happen to timber frame houses. So if the house is maintained, it's going to last for a very long time. And the reason it will last for a very long time, you know, like 100, 200 years, is because it's good architecture and people want to look after it. If it's abandoned, any house, if it's abandoned, you know, could deteriorate quite quickly. But yeah, there's the houses will typically last. The timber, for example, on the outside will typically last. The Siberian larch will typically last 70 years if it's properly detailed. If it's not been put on correctly by the joiner and they've ignored our details, then that timber could start rotting quite quickly if it can't breathe. So yeah, how long the house lasts will depend on the upkeep. Yeah, do we operate in Isle of Harris and Lewis? Yeah, we do a lot of work in Harris and Lewis. We've got a turnkey service there. We've teamed up with OMAC, who are fantastic contractors from Lewis. Do we have contractors we work with in Wicklow? We don't have contractors in Ireland at the moment to offer a turnkey service. We have teamed up with SIP Energy in Ireland to offer a fantastic service of SIP to do supplying the rec with them, and they're great guys to work with. But we do have agents in Ireland, architects that we work with, and you know, through their contacts, we may be able to find a contractor for you in Wicklow. But I know that a lot of contractors and tradesmen are getting sucked into Dublin at the moment because it's overheating. Okay, the slides available on the website. I can easily put this up in the members area afterwards if people want to look at the slides. That's no problem at all. The energy rating, the EPC of a HebHomes, we normally, the energy rating will change depending on the heating system that's chosen by the client, but also the orientation. I disagree with Fraser from something he said earlier on about wanting the houses to face south. You don't want your house to be, your large glazing to be facing due south because the risk of overheating. You want it to be facing onto your best views, to be honest. But if you are facing due south, you'll have to put in something like a trellis to prevent overheating in the summer. You know, you see these houses which got the big glazed gables. I mean, nowadays with building regulations in both England and Scotland, you have to prove that your house isn't going to overheat. And that's very difficult to do if you've got a glazed gable. It will overheat. So yeah, the EPC, going back to that, the EPC will depend on the orientation of the building, but generally we're looking at B+. I mean, if it has to go up to A, then we can do that, but it's changing. You know, it will come down to the orientation of the house, the heating systems that are chosen, and we go through a process of doing the SAP calculations, which will tell you what the energy rating is. But I understand to get the Ecology Building Society grant, they're looking for a B or B+ anyway, so that's what we tend to at least work to. Plan permission for larger versions, 2 wings, and then build only one and save to build the second part. Yeah, you could technically do that. One of the problems with doing that is that you'll have planning and you'll have building warrant approval for the full build. So once you move into the half that you have built, you won't basically have building warrant approval. You won't have what's called a completion certificate, I should say. And yeah, so it's something that might be quite tricky to do. The benefit of it is if you were to build one half initially, get completion on it, and then extend it in the future, you're paying 20% VAT. So you might think you're saving money, but you could actually be costing yourself a lot of money. So it's best just to try and get the full thing built initially. How much should we allow for sewage and access track? I mean, ideally, your site has already got sewage and access track in. I mean, that's the ideal site. It's been pre-developed by a developer and it's just ready. That's the one builders love. They just turn up and all that's there. How long's a piece of string? We had a client who thought they bought a cheap site on the east coast of Harris, and it was 40,000–50,000 pounds to put the road in because they were digging through the hardest rock in the world. And then they had to try and flatten the site, which I think was another 40,000 pounds. So that's why you've got to be very careful and know these things before you buy. Equivalent of PDR in Scotland. What does PDR stand for, Fraser?
I'm not sure what PDR is. Permitted development rights.
Right.
Yeah.
There is in Scotland. I mean, permitted development rights. You've got to be quite careful. I mean, you can build in the garden. It's got to be, I think, eaves have got to be under 3 meters. It can't be facing onto the street. It's got to be effective. It's got to effectively be an annex to your house. So if you were to build, say, a holiday home or anything in your garden which would result in more traffic coming to your house, that's not permitted development. That's a planning issue. So it's got to go through planning. So to be honest, it's best just going through. You're not actually saving much. And also, if it's permitted development rights and it's effectively an extension to your house, then even though it's not connected to your house, there's a very strong argument you'll have to pay 20% VAT on it. So to be honest, it's best just to get planning, unless there's a really compelling reason why you won't do it. And the existing building is going to be demolished and replaced with cat house. It's not normally easy in planning. That is relatively easy. There's some, like Perth and Kinross, for example, if it's a more historic building, an older building that looks nice, they've got a policy where the preference is to renovate. Renovating an old building is a lot more expensive than a new building if you're going to do it properly. So what they look for is an engineer to effectively say, this is not worth saving. So I know that happens in Perth and Kinross, but in general, unless there's architectural merit to the building, it would be quite straightforward. Some poor person's waiting for planning for 12 months. That might be in England.
One question that keeps popping up, you'll know a bit more about this, Ali, but finding a plot.
Yeah, finding a plot. I mean, what I would say about finding a plot is local estate agents, register with them, try and talk to them in the area that you want to build and say, look, if they know what's coming up before they actually stick it up on the website. So you can build a relationship with them. And what I would say about in Scotland, if you're looking to build in Scotland, if you're selling a house, it goes to the closing date and people are bidding against each other, and it can really escalate in some areas. What we find with buying a site, rather than it going to closing dates, I mean, during lockdown, it was ridiculous. People were buying sites unseen from the other side of the world for silly money. But at the moment, what I would say, if you see a site that you like, it's best to try and get in contact with the actual seller and say, what do you want to take it off the market so it doesn't go to closing date? And that happens quite a lot. But in terms of finding plots, there's Plot Finder. You can actually contact the likes of Retis, these companies that represent the big estates. Quite often the estates won't advertise plots, but they'll have plots that they'll want to move on just to raise a bit of capital, a bit of cash. It's worth talking to them. But the main thing is just keep your ear on the ground in the local area where you want to build. If you're looking in the whole of Scotland or the whole of Britain, then it's a bit of a nightmare. You really want to determine, first of all, we sometimes have people coming to us like that, determine where you actually want to live, and then it's much easier.
Yeah, I think you can also look online, obviously, Rightmove, Plot Finder. There's plenty of websites out there that you can see what's available. I think we're probably going to, we've already run over time. I think we're going to struggle to get through all the questions. I've just had a question asking for a session just on questions, which isn't a bad idea. But what we'll do is we'll leave a bit more time at the end of next webinar. So we'll plan for the next webinar to be probably middle of January. Still need to figure out what that's going to be about, but based on the questions, I think we've got a good idea of what we'll need to cover. but we'll try and we'll arrange that for the middle of January and leave a bit more time for questions at the end. But I hope that's been really informative, and I hope it's given you a bit of an insight as to what you need to think about when you're building a house and buying a plot. The process is, it should be exciting. We're experiencing that in taking clients through that journey and making sure they've got everything that they need to get started on site. But it is a very exciting and dynamic process that we want to get you really involved with. So when you're making design tweaks, when you're specifying things like kitchens and all your internal layouts, and putting you in touch with interior designers, that's the bit of it that's really enjoyable. And the more work you can do at that stage, the more is resolved for going to site. So we want it to be exciting and fun and enjoyable. And we love doing what we do. We love building these beautiful houses on amazing sites. We're very passionate about it. So I do hope that you found it informative. If you do have a plot and you're strongly considering building a Heb home, or maybe you've identified a plot and you're quite serious about progressing, and you've got a realistic budget and funding in place, or you've considered funding options, then it'd be good to have a chat. We are usually very busy, particularly this time of the year. We need to be quite selective with which projects we take on. So if you think you might be a good fit and you kind of meet those criteria on the slideshow, then do get in touch and we can get a meeting arranged. Slots to get started with us are first come, first serve. Usually we've got a bit of a waiting list, so please do drop us an email or give us a call and we can get something arranged to discuss further. But going forward, we'll be having monthly webinars on much more focused topics. Today has been very much a whistle-stop tour, so we'll go into a lot more detail on different topics that you guys want to hear about. So we'll give you an opportunity to ask for certain webinars. Is there anything else you want to finish on, Ali?
No, that was good. I mean, I think, as Fraser said, we didn't go into a lot of detail. We maybe spent too long in planning. Didn't go a lot. There's so much more that you can learn from this. I mean, there's 100 different topics we could do a webinar on, but we'll keep doing them. We'll build them up. We'll make these available on our YouTube channel. We'll start building that up. And if you're not already a member within the members area, there's fantastic resources there. There's lots of guides which tells you about how to budget, how to find a site, what design changes you should do, how you should site a house, various things like that. So yeah, read through that information, and as Fraser says, give us feedback. Let us know what you want to hear about, what you want to talk about. If there's anything you want on the website that's not there, let us know. The estimate of costs, they've been updated recently. Go in and read them and see if you can understand them. They're great tools. Ask us if you're not sure how to read them. But yeah, I think that's it. And yeah, well, maybe some of you will join us again next month.
Great. Well, thanks so much for joining, guys. I hope you've enjoyed that. I think it went fairly well for our first one. So to many more, we'll be in touch with the next one. So yeah, thanks again. Hope you enjoy the rest of your days.
Okay, bye just now.
See you later.